The screen.
I'm sorry, Dan.
No, I was just saying I couldn't see who it was in the picture in the screen.
Yeah,
It was
sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. So I think we're all good.
Right, can I make this presentation ready?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a different desk than I'm used to. I don't know how to make it.
What were you trying to do? Sorry, quickly.
I'm just trying to make it full screen.
Oh, okay.
Not idea on people for a change. So it comes in. I could stay at home. Usually trying to get people in off of Zoom, so we have in-person meetings, which I think they're much more effective, especially.
Presenting teams,
maybe? Behind the
What's on
scenes.
from the beginning.
So there are residential property disclosures on the way if you don't. I don't know. The regular one that, fire beware, caveat emptor.
Oh, that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a hard time finding it, then I saw one. That's Pendus or whatever.
Oh,
I don't know.
you can use, what forms are there? Yeah, the forms for those too.
It was hard to find it. I mean, I spent,
Yeah, they,
because I was doing a transaction, it was a lease, so I was.
Is that?
whatever they,
Yeah.
they can see it.
Can you guys still see it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
I don't need I don't need the notes. I need the full screen. And is it from you in PowerPoint?
Yeah. I just
So why don't you put it in share? If you put the,
I just had it a second.
so if you want the header gone, go over to the three dots.
I just had it a second ago.
Yeah, and including the main one.
So do you want this header gone?
Right.
Yeah.
So three dots,
Uh-huh.
get rid of hide panel floating,
This one here.
hide,
This one.
yes.
Yep.
So now, in order to get it back, you hit escape. Now, if you want to put this in mode, just go ahead here.
That's
It's
another.
So the question is,
Yeah, I feel like that's good as well.
I'll just put it.
okay, so do this, if you hit escape. Okay, get out of share, screen share,
Yeah.
But it's none of their business.
stop share. Okay, now let's go and find her PowerPoint.
I'm sorry.
I don't know.
Let me close this one.
Okay.
The end just started, this, and I'm like, well, I know. It is. I mean, I get why
Set
he's
up a
doing it.
PowerPoint so it's already in
Right.
show mode.
Apparently fellows didn't do it.
Here.
Well, it's not-
So why isn't it doing it? That's the problem.
So I put it in monitor one.
You did what?
I put it on monitor one.
So once you get her in just presentation mode, then share the screen again, and then it should be gone, and then get rid of the float.
I always love the.
There we go.
There you go.
Right.
It's a full screen.
Yeah.
Good job.
It's because we've seen screenshots from the forms itself, so.
So now I need to
Just
just
to see
put
the-
that
Just
in.
share, yeah.
Share the screen. It's screen 2.
Really?
Okay.
That's much better, Raymond.
We good?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And audio's good, everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I think we're set then.
And you said I can hide these?
Oh, yeah. And let's put that hard flow in.
Hide floating.
Yep, that's it, we're good.
Awesome. Okay, great. So talk to some of you briefly, but my name is Ariane Wahab. I am a staff attorney at NVAR. Maria is the Senior Director of Legal Affairs. She is not with us today. She is in Paris. And I was in Clarendon last night, so I did lose my voice a little, so excuse me for that. But I am going to be presenting on standard forms updates. So I would like, if potentially there's going to be some designated times to ask questions, but if there's something that, because we're probably going to get to what your question will be, so I prefer if you wait for your questions until then. But if you have any other questions that you think that you weren't answered today, or they are specific to a case that you are dealing with, please ask me on the legal hotline, nvar.com/legal hotline. It's also the best way to contact me. I'm checking it constantly throughout the day, and we will call you back with an answer that is personalized to your case. It is typically not helpful in these classes to bring up a case-by-case thing, but anyways. So January 1 standard forms updates. So this is great. It's really not moving after all of these technical difficulties. Okay, so we're actually going to start with the listing agreement amendment. So you all know this form as something you use to amend the listing agreement only, but now we have changed it to the brokerage representation agreement amendment. I know it's a long name, but it's going to be applying to all types of brokerage agreements, both the listing side and the buyer tenant side. We've removed the cancellation and early termination paragraph from this form because of the July 23 forms update with the new early termination forms that we have. So we are now using this just as you typically were, but again, both for the buyer side or the tenant side. And how it looks, and you can see in the text here in the screenshot here, is that you have the choice to select either the listing agreement or the buyer tenant agreement at the top. And then the form itself, you can choose which one applies to you. And then you can get into what you're amending in your brokerage representation agreement. But in case you can't find it with your forms provider, remember that the name has changed. It is the same number, K0004, but it is a different name. A new home sales addendum, we just very briefly updated this one just to make sure it's compliant with the law. So in case you do see that the version number has changed, it's only because of a legal compliance update. So nothing that should affect you all in practice. For the sales contract for unimproved land, we are going to be looking at this more as a standard forms committee this year, but in the meantime, we have just updated the boilerplate and we've added an attorney fees paragraph to make sure it's consistent with the residential sales contract. And we've updated the additions paragraph at the bottom just to make sure it's consistent for now, but do expect big changes to come to this form later this year, hopefully. The main sales contract. So this is probably going to be the first thing that's really going to affect you all in practice. So paragraph 16, which is the WDI paragraph, as you can see, we've added this language in red and removed one of the confusing provisions just to—
Excuse me, can
Yeah.
I, sorry, just to go back to that last slide, can I ask a quick question? You said the unimproved land contract is some big changes coming. Can you give me a little?
It's very, no, it's the thing is, it's something that we are considering. I think the Standard Forms Committee, we've met to discuss our priorities for the year, and something that we are thinking about is making this form much more clear when it comes to selling raw land versus tear downs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So residential sales contract. So the biggest thing here, again, we needed to clarify the WDI section of this. So previously it wasn't clear that when the report comes back that the treatment is going to be for live WDI. You can't really treat or clean up dead WDI. That doesn't really make any sense. And you can't, it's very speculative. So we just want to clarify that the treatment that is required is for live existing insects and repairs for any damage identified in the report. So this looks like a small change, but hopefully this will impact you all and help you in practice. We've also updated just some minor things throughout the agreement that shouldn't affect you all too much. Just changed some language in the additions paragraph and updated the names of the forms. This is probably going to be the only major change in the sales contract.
I'm in a class.
You guys in person, you have privilege to ask questions, and I hope you hear that online.
So you said to repair any damage. I've had houses where there's been carpenter bee holes.
Yes.
There's no evidence of a carpenter bee there today.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that we would have to repair those little holes?
Yes, if it is likely, if the WGI report identifies it as likely caused by WGI.
Okay. Is that new? Because I don't remember us having to repair anything if it was just 2 holes on a, 2x12 deck board.
I mean, yeah, it did previously say any treatment and or repairs for damage identified. So it would have been a requirement even back
Yeah,
then.
I don't think repair comes for that, but okay.
Okay, so this is something that will really be useful to you all in Loudoun, especially if you're selling homes in Loudoun. This is it's a completely new form. It's the Airport Impact Overlay Disclosure Notice. And it is for pursuant to Loudoun's new ordinance last year, which requires agents to provide a disclosure for potential airport noise in all marketing materials and sales contracts for the resale of any home located within the AIOD in Loudoun County. So this language has been approved by the Loudoun County Zoning Administrator. We had to send it to them, which is why we couldn't publish this form earlier last year. And it contains instructions as to how to find out whether or not your property is located within the AIOD, because I know some people aren't really sure, and it's not a very clear path, but you will find out in this form how to figure that out. So the way the form looks, this is the entirety of the form essentially, besides the signatures at the bottom, is that you have a property that you're selling in Loudoun County. So you identify that property, and then you check one of two things. Whether or not the property is located within the following noise impact area. And you're going to find that out by going to this map and this link at the bottom. It's an interactive map, meaning that you can search your address and it'll pop up where in the AIOD it is. And you can move it around and see if other neighborhoods are affected as well. In that map, you will see, again, what noise contour the house is in. There's 3 noise contours. It's very unlikely to ever be LDN 65 or higher. That's almost rare that homes are ever built there. It's usually going to be one of those first 2. And then you're going to select which airport the noise contour is in. It's going to be Dulles or Leesburg. Most likely it will be Dulles, and most likely it'll be within 1 mile of the LDN 60. So you check these 2 boxes, and then you provide the disclosure to the prospective buyer. You also have to include this disclosure, or at least the text of it, in all marketing materials for the property, which is Loudoun's requirement. I know it can seem like a burden, but that is what they require.
What text needs to be included? Just the
Just-
boxes we've checked?
Yes,
Or-
basically this home is located within LDN 60 to 65 of Dulles Airport.
So we're
Okay.
slapping this in every contract in most of Ashburn.
Yes.
Mhm.
For the foreseeable future.
Yes.
until they realize.
Yes, and it previously this only applied to new builds, but now it is all resale.
And it's on us to get, this is
Mhm.
for us to present to our buyers.
To prospective buyers and in
Right.
all marketing materials.
So the listing.
That means the
agent may have to
listing.
do
Everybody
this.
has an extra.
Yep, it is a requirement for including like the flyers for the open house, the listing itself, all of that.
So can you just print that like a quick stamp or something?
Yeah,
at the
within 1
bottom
mile
corner
of, just as long as you're including within this, one of these and one of these, within 1 mile of Dulles.
Will there be a place in Bright where we can actually check these boxes?
Well, given that it only applies to 1 county in Virginia, I doubt that they have created
there
something
should
like
be.
this. It's definitely something that you guys can pressure Bright to do, and we can obviously ask them as well. We've been in contact with them about certain other changes that we want to see. So I'm happy to reach out to them.
Does this apply to existing listings that are active,
Yes, because this has been in place since January,
if they were active before January 1st?
January 1st of 2023.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
What?
January 17th, actually.
2023?
Yes, we didn't have the form out, but we've had guidance and education out. Yes,
So no one can come back on it and be like, hey, you did.
well, they can. So please be doing this moving forward. And this is what it looks like. These are the 2 contours. That one is the top, one on top is Leesburg, the lower one is Dulles. So again, when you pull up the map, this is what you'll see. You can type in the address and figure out where on this map you are. And again, only Loudoun County. I know that parts of Dulles affect Fairfax. Again, this is only Loudoun.
Can I get a picture of that again, real quick?
Yep.
Thank you so much.
You know what, that's a good idea, let me do the same thing.
That's,
I mean, it's gonna be there online.
I thought you said the first thing was gonna be the most important thing for us on the contract.
I'm used to teaching in Fairfax and
Gotcha.
Arlington. Okay, so we've also updated the solar panel forms that were introduced in July, just because we were waiting to see feedback from people actually using them to see what we needed to add or change. One of the things that we did add was a definitions paragraph at the end, so people were aware of what exactly a solar panel constituted or a solar loan. Simplified the form as well. We've added a solar loan financing contingency because we found out that the financing for solar loans sometimes would take a longer time than expected. We've added a requirement for seller to transfer any credits or tax credits that they may have or energy certificates to the buyer at settlement, and since they will no longer need them or be benefiting from them, they need to transfer that to the buyer. And we've added an other section since there can be so many things that arise when it comes to solar panels. Okay, another thing, actually, you know what, because solar panels are a little bit confusing, do you have any questions from Zoom or with regards to any other forms before I proceed? Okay.
Can I ask a question? This is
Yes.
Kathleen. Can we go back to the airport overlay?
Yeah.
I have more questions about that than anything else. I think that this is processing this one. So do we need to go back to anyone, like anything that's currently under contract at this moment? Do we need to make sure that this is?
You need to include the disclosure notice, yes, currently in any pending contracts that you have right now in Loudoun, to provide it to the prospective buyer.
And then if we just opened ourselves up to like a whole year worth of potential.
Okay, I'm going to be frank with you. The way that it works to report something to the zoning administrator in Loudoun is a process. So if you really have a buyer that really hated you and wants to go and do that, you know, that's up on you. That's on you and your reputation management and your interactions with previous buyers. I personally never despise anybody enough to go through the process of reporting somebody to a zoning administrator for failing to include language in a flyer for an open house. But if somebody were to do that, yes, they could potentially, and it would be likely be a $500 fine.
Okay, and then my next question is, could we just should we just download the copy of this form and upload it into Bright into the document section? That's like.
Yep, that's
available?
that's a very, very easy way to do it.
Okay.
And again, if you go on our website, just like if you Google like Loudoun AIOD or airport impact, whatever, disclosure notice, I have also just drafted just language that you can use in your marketing materials as well.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Do you have any other questions before I proceed with pet addendum, assistance animal addendum? Okay.
Yes, I clicked on that link in the airport overlay thing.
Yes.
It brings me to a map and it shows me the blue things. Unfortunately, when you try to zoom in, there's no street names and you can't tell exactly where you are, and I don't see any place to type in an address to say, this address and where is it?
It should be on the upper right. It looks very similar to the to Jade or the GIS system. But or if there should be a magnifying glass at the top that you can
Okay,
click
so
on.
the search where it says search, you could type an address there and then it'll pop up.
Yep, when you click search, you can search.
Okay, thanks.
Do they have this as a filter in the regular GIS?
Yes.
Now, too?
But it's a little bit more complicated.
Alright.
Okay, the pet addendum and assistance animal addendum. So for this one, we have clarified that you can put type or breed because some people were not really clear as to what breed their animal was. So we gave them that option. We've also increased the number of pets that they can put on the pet addendum, not the assistance animal addendum, obviously. That one will still only be one animal at a time. But for the pet addendum, we've expanded that to 4, and we've made a really helpful chart that I think will be easier for you all to fill out. We've just renamed also the deposit and fee to pet deposit and non-refundable pet fee as opposed to additional fee or additional deposits. It wasn't clear. And we've also updated the terms and conditions on both forms, not only for consistency, but also just to increase landlord protections and to increase tenant liability for potential damages, and to clarify a little bit more explicitly that a breach of the addendum can constitute a breach of lease. We were really wanting to edit these forms substantially because of the increase of usage of pets and assistance animals over COVID.
Ariane, could you
Yeah.
answer, this is Dan Bouchard. A couple of things on this. Could you talk about the fact that an assistance animal, a service animal, is not a pet? And
Yeah.
number two, a question that came up yesterday. If an applicant puts in an application and does not include in their application mention of their service animal, is there a scenario there that causes the landlord or the listing agent to determine that that was not a complete application and therefore rejected based on that?
That's an excellent question, and I could spend half an hour on this alone. So just to clarify upfront, assistance animals, as they are qualified as such, are not pets. You cannot charge a fee towards assistance animals. You cannot charge back fee. You cannot charge pet rent, pet deposit, anything like that. You cannot provide make an additional increase their security deposit. There can never be an additional penalty towards the tenant for having an assistance animal. When a tenant makes an application and they don't identify that they have a service or by the way, assistance animal is an umbrella term. It refers to both service animals and ESAs. So I'm going to use assistance animal to refer to both. So when a tenant makes an application and they fail to identify the existence of their assistance animal, it is not an invalid application because an assistance animal request can be made at any time since a disability can occur at any time. So whether or not you think that impacts that tenant's credibility is subjective, and it would be up to a court to decide. But I would not go so far as to deny an application simply because somebody had an assistance animal and didn't include it in their application. I think that would lead to more trouble than it's worth in terms of probably confirming a fair housing violation has occurred if you deny that person's application. Now you could argue, well, they weren't honest with me up front. Well, a judge would say, well, they're telling you now that they have an assistance animal. Are you going to accept it or not? So I would not get to that level. Of course, you can always verify disability. You can request that verification and they can provide that information to you depending on whether or not it's a service animal or an assistance animal. Yeah, did you want to follow up on that?
I'm going to add on to this. So the rental application right now does not differentiate between pets or assistance animals, right? There is no differentiation.
Okay.
I'm assuming that's the way it is. I don't do it.
Honestly, off the top of my head, I couldn't.
If there's not, there should be.
Yeah.
Right? It should be assistance animal, and attached would be the verification of
Disability.
Yeah. Because
thing is,
we
you don't-
shouldn't, as agents, be involved in weeding through all of that and trying to decipher. We've got enough things we decipher up, right?
That's a good, I'm
That would
looking
be
for
a
my phone
good
to write
way
this
for
down.
us to avoid any future issues.
Okay, so, you want me to check whether or not the rental application has the differentiation?
Yeah, I don't know that it does. And if we use like rent spree, I don't know even on there, because I haven't filled out an application. So.
Okay. Check. It's good point. Okay.
Thank you.
But the term animal does refer to both pets and assistance animal, if that word is in there, but I haven't looked at it yet.
So, I mean, it's also a fact that even assistance animal has considerations as far as the condition of the home when that person moved out. Is this a
That's what we improved the terms and conditions of the assistance animal addendum to clarify again that even though it's an assistance animal and that you don't have any additional penalty, you're not being charged an additional penalty for having it.
Yeah.
Because it's still part of you as a tenant.
You
And
can't
it's,
be negligent as a tenant.
you are
and
still
trash the
obligated
house
to
and
keep
get
the
off
home.
scot-free.
Exactly. You are still obligated to keep the home in good condition and repair and restore the home if you caused damage that exceeds beyond normal wear and tear. Okay, and just as a screenshot, just wanted to show you what the new chart looked like in the pet addendum. So I hope it's clear. So for the lease itself, again, we noticed an increase of complaints about the lease, about leasing and enforcement generally. We had a lot of landlord-tenant issues come up this past year. So we have substantially revised the default and enforcement provisions of the lease itself, mostly to bring it in compliance with the law. We found that it wasn't in compliance. We have also increased the time period for landlords to provide itemization of damages that exceed the amount of security deposit, because this was a temporary change under the VRLTA, and it will revert back to 15 days in July 2024. But for now, the landlord has 30 days to itemize, an additional 30 days to itemize any other damages. We've also added a new early termination right for tenant, which is pursuant to the law as well. And in this law, how it works is it started in July. When a tenant moves in and there is a condition in this home that could severely impact health, safety, or life, and that is defined in the law itself, what that could be, like for example, a rodent infestation or lead in the paint. Something like this would allow a tenant to terminate a lease within the first 7 days. And then the landlord has the right within 15 days to contest that termination. We've already seen this used. Specifically, it was a home in Arlington that was older, and it was a family with children, and they had lead-based paint everywhere, and the tenant terminated within the first 7 days. So another thing we have done is we substantially rewrote the tenant and default and enforcement provision. This was the language, early termination. This was the early termination language I just mentioned. I know it's wordy, but this is basically directly from the law that they are entitled to terminate and go back and forth on this. Another thing that we have.
What about their application fee?
I'm sorry?
Was their application fee also returned to them?
Their application fee, I don't think the law clarifies that, so I don't believe so. Because a valid lease is still signed.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So if we're properly marketing a listing, we're disclosing up front that the property has potential for lead-based paint because it was built before 78, right?
Yes.
So why would the tenant have get out of jail free if that's been disclosed, early on in the transaction?
Well, would you still want to live there?
Why would they have moved forward with renting it?
Why would they still rent the place? Like, why would you want to live there?
Why would they pursue that property if they knew it had lead-based paint in the beginning?
But how would they know if the owner said in their disclosure, we don't know of any lead-based paint?
Well, if it was built before 78, it had lead-based paint.
But how do we know it was never remediated? How do we know it was never remediated?
Well, remediating it just paints over it. That's
Exactly.
how you remediate lead-based paint.
But in this situation, the owner never remediated it.
So you're saying since 1978, this house was never painted? Is that what you're saying?
Either it wasn't painted. The point is they did tests throughout the house and they found that the lead levels were very high.
And you could do that in any 1940s house in Arlington. Just go to any door jam and you'll
Sure.
find that. So that's the grounds to.
Would you want to live there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm from Arlington.
Yeah. Well, they didn't want to live there, and that was a valid reason to terminate. The landlord wasn't taking any action to remediate.
In
Sure.
Arlington, most of Fairfax until you get outside the Beltway. I mean,
Sure,
that's-
but then you shouldn't be renting your house then if you don't want to, if you don't care about the life and safety of your tenant.
I mean, that's not the situation. It's the people accept that risk because they know the only housing available started being built in the 30s
Okay,
in Arlington. So there is not a single house.
but is there anything stopping that landlord from remediating?
I mean, everybody just painted over.
Okay, and if it was that paint satisfactory to remediate the lead? When they tested it, was it above, health safety levels, like the above safe levels? In this home, they tested it and it was not safe
It
to
just-
live in.
I would see now.
That's what I
you
was
can
saying.
Quantify that, and it's really, that wouldn't just be the door.
Okay,
That would be all over
The walls,
place.
the
it was
ceiling,
everywhere.
right.
It was in the dirt, it was when the kids were playing outside, it was like a whole situation.
But it's only for lead-based paint, not.
No, that was an
any other
example.
environment. Right, but
If there's mold.
If there's
rodents.
mold, if there's,
How about rodents?
yeah, roach or a rodent infestation.
asbestos tile.
Yeah, I mean, if it's to the level where it's unsafe to live in this home, absolutely.
Then maybe we need to start having our landlords have tests done before we even take
Yes.
the listing to rent.
This is
Yeah.
very sticky stuff.
Or
So-
you potentially could give the tenant a 5-day window to test if they want to pursue that before they, finalize the lease.
Absolutely. Okay, so another thing that was added was because I think some agents forgot that when appointing a resident agent for a non-resident landlord, you also must appoint that with the landlord also must file that resident agent appointment with the SEC. It's only a $10 fee, but a lot of people were forgetting to do this. So we just added this reminder in the lease itself that when you're appointing a resident agent, please don't forget also to appoint that with the SEC. And again, it can be a resident agent for a non-resident landlord. It can be any resident of Virginia with a place of business in Virginia. So it can be like the landlord's brother if they have a place of business in Virginia. It doesn't have to be the property manager or the agent themselves. We've also added that to all other leasing forms, just to clarify that don't forget that the landlord has to do this. And it's a really simple process. They can do it online. Tenant move out obligations, we have clarified those as well. We've added the requirements to return keys. We moved that up just to fix that up since now we've updated the pet and assistance animal addendums. Those requirements have been moved there, so no worries about it being in the lease itself. Okay, property management agreement. Again, we had so many leasing issues this past year. That's why we really had to revise these forms. But we have, again, updated the non-resident landlord language, similar to the lease, and the surveillance system language, because we found an increase of people having surveillance systems like Ring videos and Nest on property.
You mean the landlords having it?
Yes.
And then tapping into the tenants and watching.
Not
and
that.
listening?
That's
I've got a friend who's dealing with that.
that's a serious crime.
Yeah, well,
That's, and I'm not surprised. And then that, and then also, this is for when showings are done. And when somebody's coming and visiting the property for like an open house or something. We've kind of pushed this requirement more on the landlord as opposed to the agent, because it really shouldn't be the agent's duty to disclose this or to announce this to any potential person coming in or prospective buyer or tenant. It's the landlord's obligation to make this disclaimer. However, if your landlord has one on property, we do advise that you include it in the listing public remarks, or have a sign on the door that says "Smile, you're being recorded," something like that. Before we move on to the big stuff, we'll get there. But before we move on, is there anything else that we have questions on that I've previously talked about? Okay, great. So again, these were the changes that came out January 1. Now we're going to get into the compensation changes for all of the brokerage representation agreements. And these have been in place in our forms library since December 1. So hopefully you all have started using them. If not, I understand it was the holidays. But
Wait, what? Buyer ultimately responsible for paying their agent. So does that mean they've got to come out of their pockets and get a little extra
Yes.
finance?
yes, yes.
Or ask for closing cost assistance to help pay for it.
So basically how this works is essentially we have substantially revised the language in the compensation paragraphs across all brokerage representation agreements to clarify them because it looked like, you know, the language that was in there was not particularly legally in most cases, you know, seller will pay. That's not very contractual language. So we just wanted to clarify this so that it was a little bit cleaner and a little bit more clear to any consumer reading the contract. So what we really wanted to emphasize were just the basic points that you should have all learned in training. Essentially that commission is fully negotiable to the broker and to the cooperating broker, which is usually the buyer broker or the tenant broker. And that the buyer or tenant is ultimately responsible for paying their own agent. It's always said before in for example, the buyer broker agreement, buyer to pay broker fee, and then it would outline what the broker fee is. But a lot of people would skip over that first part and not be sure who pays, but it is the buyer, they're signing the agreement. And also that individual brokerages have the discretion to set their own rates based on value and expertise of that agent. And we also removed any indicator that cooperative compensation is required to be offered.
Wait a second, so it's still got the lines in there where if we choose to work as the seller paying both sides, then that's perfectly legal.
Yeah, because it is.
But we're gonna come up against or up to listings that they're not offering anything, in which case we go to buyers and say,
if you don't mind, I'm gonna get into this. Don't worry, I'm gonna get into the meat of it.
Ariane,
Yes.
Ariane, could I just add something really quick? So as a matter of policy within our company, Remax Distinctive, the company does not set a commission standard.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent.
That is up to the individual agents.
I can't believe it's actually even in there in writing. Right. Because that's part of this whole lawsuit about setting a standard compensation.
which the lawsuit blindsided me because it's always been negotiable.
Yeah.
There's always nothing set. I mean, it's almost the first thing you learn.
Well, I mean, don't forget, this is a large country, you know, and there's many, many agents. And some people were not following rules, and they found that those individuals were not following rules.
Yeah, I feel like everyone was pretty much following the rules because
We're lucky we're in the Northern Virginia real estate market. Where everyone here is pretty great, so.
But this is so awful for us now.
Well, this case was in Missouri. So, yes, again, we have clarified that cooperating compensation is not required and that the listing broker is to have the conversation regarding the pros and cons of offering cooperative compensation to their clients, should they so wish. We've also updated the disclaimer at the bottom. This is essentially what the new paragraph looks like. So in the listing agreement, that's what I'm talking about in this section here. In the listing agreement, paragraph 12, that is the broker compensation paragraph. Part C identifies what the cooperating broker or the buyer's broker receives. So this is the paragraph that we've most revised. We've defined what cooperating compensation is, which is buyer agency compensation, an amount taken from broker compensation and paid to any broker representing buyer. We found that consumers weren't really clear as to what cooperating commission meant. So we identified that as buyer agency compensation. And these should be the same. We've been looking at this. We looked at this all of 2023. And this was the first change we made just in terms of clarifying that it could be a percentage of gross sales price or a dollar amount or a hybrid. So we just cleaned that up a little.
Is there room in there to put X% minimum?
Good question. So we actually removed the ability, we've talked to our forms providers and we've removed the ability to include any text in these blanks. It should be only numbers. Because if
Yeah.
yeah, Dan.
Oh, yeah, go, that, no, I continue on. I want to add something afterwards, but continue on your sentence.
We don't want to create confusion for especially your clients. And also, we don't want to risk an unenforceable contract by putting any language in there that is conditional.
So if a listing is paying a buyer broker
Mhm.
2 pennies,
Sure.
and we've written in there 1.5
Okay.
pennies, where does the other half a penny go?
This is the listing agreement.
I'm sorry. I'm thinking.
Oh, you're
I'm
thinking
looking at
ahead.
a
You're
buyer
jumping ahead. It's
broker
okay. We'll get
agreement.
there. I'll have an answer to your question.
My bad.
Dan.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of lately, and this is one of the things I'd like to ask you to address too, is of course, a lot of agents are seeing that you're getting, whenever we're seeing the language of per MLS or any kind of other text in the field added onto the buyer agency agreements that says anything except for a specific dollar or percentage amount, a lot of you are seeing that that you're getting those things kicked back at you as unacceptable through our compliance process. And so, Ariana, if you can talk about those two things, caveats to, all right, it'll be 2.5% unless we have this, and this. That kind of stuff we can't have. It's got to be an exact dollar or a percentage amount. So, Ariana, can you piggyback on that?
Yeah, so essentially, even in the listing agreement, or especially in the buyer broker agreement, you cannot be putting an amount that buyer would pay as a broker fee that is not a set number. You cannot be saying per MLS or, whatever the offer of compensation is, because you can't guarantee, first of all, you can't guarantee that there will be an offer of compensation. You can't guarantee what that amount will be. And you can't guarantee if that amount will fit your value or what services you've provided your buyer. Another thing is, and most importantly from a legal perspective, it will create an unenforceable contract if you don't have a set number in a contract, because it's totally conditional. For example, let's say buyer puts offer on a house that has $0 listing commission. If there's a 0 listing commission and you put per MLS in the buyer broker, yeah, you would be getting 0, and you would have basically worked for free, or you would have provided work that didn't match your value. You would be paid that not according to your value and your expertise or whatever you did in this transaction. Now, some agents may be fine with that, but most aren't and shouldn't be. So we do not advise per MLS to be in these agreements. Plus, without having a set number in the payment section, I don't want to say definitively that there is no consideration in the agreement, but essentially what are you agreeing to in this contract? You're basically agreeing to provide services to this buyer, but what is the buyer giving you? And this is
it's
a
no different than
contract.
like a retainer fee of $1 to make this a legally binding.
Yes. So no, it's worse because it's totally conditional. It's not guaranteed, and it's almost you're agreeing for something totally speculative. If this goes in front of a court, they're going to say, well, did you even have a contract to begin with? So I would really not recommend putting per MLS or anything in writing in these blanks, in both buyer side and the listing side. If you wanted to do an addendum that says, something variable or based on a minimum, that's dependent on your broker policy, and that's something that you would need to discuss with them.
I don't even understand variable.
Okay.
I've never used it.
Okay.
But when we get to the buyer broker, I do want.
Sure.
Quick question, more for the agents than the presenter. Does the MLS system allow you to put in a cooperating single dollar amount?
I could
Yes.
as a listing put in a dollar amount. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, you could put in a percentage or a straight dollar
Yeah,
amount.
because it gives you the option to pull down percent or dollar.
Right, it does give you the option, and you can put in an actual specific dollar amount.
It can
Thank you.
also say 0.
You can also put
You can
0.
also put 0, yes.
So can we discuss on this since we have this up? If we put 2.5%, let's say, on the buyer agency, not on this, but on the buyer agency agreement, and it's 3% offered, or there's a bonus, whatever. How is
So
that?
you would get that additional 5, you would get to keep that additional 0.5% as an agreement between you and the listing agent and the seller.
But our buyer brokerage agreement only said 2.5.
Right,
That
but
was
don't
my
forget,
question.
yes, but don't forget, she's right.
What, Kenny?
It says that they've even covered that.
This language has been in here for years.
Yes.
This final sentence, you know you should. This says, broker may retain any additional compensation offered by the seller or seller's representative, even if this causes compensation paid to broker to exceed the fee.
Well, who would have thought?
This has been here for years, dude.
I can
Okay, so back to this. So again, when you're just explaining this to your clients, just remember that the offer of compensation is not required. But if you did want to explain any pros of it, you know, the purpose is to defray any costs that the buyer would otherwise be responsible for coming out of pocket. And also that it's an incentive to increase traffic to the home. It allows more buyers to come see your property, particularly FHA and VA buyers that may not necessarily have the funds. Don't ever say, though, that this is an incentive for you as a listing agent to show the house, because that's not the case. It encourages other people to want to see it, sure, but it's not for you to show, because we really want to make sure that it is the clients driving this decision and not you pushing them towards a certain direction.
Ariana, can you talk a little bit about using language in your discussions with the clients about saying things like the seller will pay?
Yeah.
You know, the seller will pay, the seller will pay. We've all been in the habit of using that language, but in reality, what I've been teaching is to get into the habit of using the phrase, the seller will reimburse you. As in exchange for the seller will pay, because pay means the buyer is not responsible for it. Using the term reimbursement goes a little bit further into talking about the obligation of the buyer being obligated to pay that fee ultimately. So can you talk a little bit more about that, your thoughts, if that's a good idea or a bad idea?
I don't see any issue with using the word reimburse. I think that's a great alternative, but I also think even better to go, I wouldn't even use the word will, because you can't guarantee it. You can't guarantee that they will offer any compensation. So,
may reimburse.
Yeah, so may, and the conversation that I would have is essentially that I would explain how it works, just what an offer of compensation is, why it's used, and whether or not they want to see homes that don't fit the buyer broker fee that you have outlined in your agreement. Now, I'm saying this from the perspective of buyer's agent. If a buyer's agent, you know, they have a certain fee that their buyer will pay, and they are looking at a home that doesn't offer that same fee or anything above that, then they would say that to your client, like, listen, this home fits the criteria that you're looking for, but I just want to let you know that they are offering, you know, X%, and it is not the same as what you owe me. So you will probably have to pay that in additional to whatever the purchase price of the home is, and anything else that goes into that, and have them make the decision as to whether or not they want to see that home. Have the client make the decision as to whether or not they want to even consider other homes like that. And if they do want to see that home, then you're going to have the conversation with them as to how do we get those two numbers to match. One of the best things that you can do is the buyer and the seller are actually allowed to negotiate, you know, commission if they want to change the offer of compensation. They're totally allowed to. You can help them facilitate that conversation, but it should be at your buyer's discretion and direction. You cannot ask the seller or the listing agent to change the terms of their listing agreement, but you know, in the contingencies and clauses addendum, there is that clause that you all use for when we have FSBO sellers or builders, where you can ask that the FSBO seller pay a certain portion of the commission, or that the builder pay the commission. And you can use that language to send to a seller as part of your offer to say, like, as part of our offer, would you be willing to pay this for us?
The buyer is asking
The seller.
you.
Mhm.
Yes.
And that's something that you can use. Now, we're working on creating an addendum that will be specific to this situation, but in the meantime, you're free to use that clause. Does that make sense? Okay. Other things in the listing agreement that we have updated, and I will get to the buyer agreement in a second. We've just clarified paragraph 10, the marketing paragraph, just added some title headings to make it a little bit cleaner. And we've added that same surveillance system language in here. What else? This is not that big of a deal. For exclusive right to lease, we updated the non-resident language in here as well. We've moved up the utilities paragraph just for consistency's sake, and updated the office exclusive language as well. So just some mirroring consistency changes, nothing too comprehensive that should change your day-to-day. Okay, so for the buyer broker and the tenant broker agreements, as you can see, we've updated the compensation paragraph here as well. Again, emphasize that buyer has the responsibility to pay the fee at settlement. So it had already said that buyer will pay compensation in the amount of X, but we just, for redundancy's sake, just added on buyer is responsible for payment of broker fee at settlement, since some people tend to have skipped over that first part of the line. We've also removed that in most cases sentence, since we found it wasn't contractually, it just wasn't legal language. And we looked back at our old forms from like 2009, and we found out that it actually already said this, and I don't know why we changed it, but it's okay. So how it reads now is that if broker receives any compensation from the seller or the seller's representative, then that amount will be credited towards the broker fee, the buyer broker fee. And of course, as
Can I
result, yeah,
Can I ask a quick question, since you're an attorney, correct?
yes.
Okay, so I understand, like, I used to put in, I'll admit this, but whatever. I used to put in some of my agreements that, you know, I talk about compensation in the actual contract. Now, my understanding is that makes you a party to the contract somehow, and that, but my other understanding is the way this is addressed in the Code of Ethics is quite archaic, because it still mentions standard agent in that part of the Code of Ethics. I think it's 18.1. I'm not positive, but so what is it that precludes us from just saying in the contract, you know, seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker X? I mean, who cares?
What do you mean? Like, why would you want to put in a contract?
Like, I put a contract that, let's say the compensation offered by the seller at contract is 0.
Okay.
Right? And I don't want to, you know, I don't want to try to get some credit back in closing costs or whatever for my buyer to pay to compensate me. What precludes me my buyer has directed me to seek this compensation from the seller. Why can I not put in the contract seller's broker, whatever, to pay, you know, X to buyer's broker?
You mentioned.
It seems pretty simple to me.
But that's attached to the contract.
But I think he's saying in the contract, not as
in the text of the contract itself.
Yeah, anywhere.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can look at adding that to the contract as a standard forms committee. I think we briefly discussed it in December, and we found that it's strange because it's not
normal.
It would sort of draw attention where it doesn't need to draw attention.
Who cares though?
Ultimately,
if it draws attention, who cares? I mean, if I get a contract from you and it says you want X, I'm going to go over it with my seller. If the net if the net's good, we're ratifying. Who cares? Who cares what the verbiage is?
I mean, again, as I said, there's nothing wrong with including that in an addendum.
I'm told that I can't do that by our broker because that makes you a party to the contract.
I think there's some confusion here. The key is because you're asking for additional funds.
Maybe they're not even additional funds. Maybe they just are funds.
Okay, so you're
Let's say
asking
the comp is zero.
that are different from the seller's listing agreement with their listing agent.
Right.
You can't ask for an amendment to their listing agreement, okay? Because that's their contract. That's totally separate from the transaction. And the contract is between the buyer and the seller, so you can ask for whatever you want.
The buyer can ask.
The buyer can ask, but you as a buyer's agent cannot be asking the listing agent or the seller to be doing something in the contract because you are not party to the contract. Is that what you're trying to say?
But the buyer.
But only
So-
to the buyer, so it's really the terms that the buyer is putting forth in order
Right.
for them to decide to buy this property. If one of those terms is
Right.
that you want to give compensation, the buyer is requesting that the seller give X amount of compensation to the buyer's representative, then that is okay. So that is a part of the term
Yep.
that the buyer is offering in order to purchase the property.
Yep, 100%. Okay. Yeah, you know. Yeah, you got it.
This will get you, I guarantee you put this in any contract, 90% of the brokers will kick it out. Tell you, and most agents will tell you it's not allowed. And I've seen it multiple times.
Let me look
And-
at the
in
language.
fact, last week,
proposing, because it's
2 weeks ago,
possible-
Dan, 2 weeks ago, Dan, did you not say we can't put that in the contract?
Yeah, yes, we did. Yeah, that is true.
If it's your broker's policy, I can't speak to your
But I
broker.
don't think it's a broker's policy. I think it's something that they,
Well,
thought
we
you
can,
can't
we
do.
can dive deeper into that, and come back to that.
okay.
Okay. We've already basically gone over this. I just want to share some tips for explaining this to your buyers and tenants. But I think the biggest thing to know is that it's the buyer's choice how to go here, in terms of whether they want to see those homes, and what they want to do in that situation where it's not the same. Are you guys seeing in the field much differentiation in terms of what's being offered as opposed to before?
It used to always be mostly 3%. When we were working 20 years ago, everything was 3%, sometimes 3.5. You get 2.5, but it seems like the range has been lowered into the 2.5s very often.
Mhm.
That's what I see the most now.
Okay.
I haven't really seen anything yet, but I think 2024 is the test case.
Yeah.
It's,
absolutely.
yeah, we're gonna see it.
And again, just we've seen some people also do seller credits, something like that, or asking for seller to subsidize in some other way to help with defraying that cost if there's any difference as well. But of course, every brokerage is going to have a different policy. So please, please, please follow whatever your broker's policy is. They have the discretion there. Okay, I think that is all I have. And I think we've discussed a lot of it already, but if you guys have any other questions, please feel free.
I do.
Yes.
Early termination
Yes.
of a listing agreement.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy because I started putting in a dollar amount for early termination.
Okay.
But the paragraph right
Mhm.
below there says without good cause. Well, that is such a
So
subjective
right.
phrase that you try to get your
I know.
X dollars when they fired you. And how can that get changed?
That is a suggestion that I can take in front of the Standard Forms Committee.
Because without good cause to me is why even bother
Right.
as an agent to put a number in there?
Right. But the only reason I can see it is because we don't want to encourage simple, the contract to end at any time. Like, let's say it's right before closing and they're like, all right, I'm just gonna terminate this contract so nobody gets paid.
I don't want to sell.
Right.
Well, guess what? I'm out X dollars because you don't want to sell, even though you signed an acceptance.
Right. there needs to be some,
Whether it be a retainer
Mhm.
or something, there needs to be something for us agents to protect us. Because I get that we're the ones that make the money. But if you don't sell that house, you still have costs
right.
associated with that listing.
I think that's a good thing to visit. It's something I've been thinking about for some time. I've
I don't know how to
looking-
fix it, but
Yeah, no, it's a good.
I know that every time I go over that with potential sellers, and I, throw out my number.
Yeah.
They're like, for what? I'm like, well, I don't work for free.
Yeah.
So it's to recoup my hard costs and to pay me for some of the time that I have put forth.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion.
And they're like, well, okay, well, how about just reimburse you for your hard costs? I'm like, yeah, no.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think that's something I've been thinking about for some time. Good one. Anything else?
You get in trouble if you have the airport sticker on all your flyers, even if it's not an airport gun, so you don't have to keep changing.
No. I mean, it could potentially be misleading advertising.
Okay.
Say that.
If you put the word potential, if you put the word potential on your sticker, is that misleading?
The disclaimer about airport.
It's a disclosure.
I'm just saying, potentially in the,
Right.
please go to this website, but
To
potentially in.
That's the thing, is like ultimately, anybody who's looking to purchase will look up the address and see Dulles Airport there, so.
As you're viewing properties, you
Yeah.
were on a plane.
But listen, I'm in the county of Loudoun, they will come after me if I say anything else.
But I'm surprised it's not in our residential property disclosure.
It's not Virginia's requirement, it's Loudoun.
Well, it could have a little bracket that says Loudon
There
County.
are like hundreds of change.
Okay. Just one more document.
It's only Loudoun.
That's all I'm saying.
Really?
Pretty much.
Because we're in Nashville right now. So I never come out here, it's very different.
Where you live at?
I live in Maryfield,
Oh.
yeah, next to the morning.
But we're directing all the airplanes over your house now.
So I don't know.
Like living next to a railroad, you just are the
We'll go to the
ambiance.
tracks.
I don't hear the train. It's 5-minute walk. Though. Nice. It's good, quiet. I love it. So okay, any other questions?
Yeah, James Bear here. I have a question. Like, for the possibility of all these lawsuits changing buyer broker compensation, more negotiable, it becoming more of a sort of visible issue for potential buyers.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a younger man, so I'm in the game too long. Has any older brokers or agents or anyone with more experience, have you dealt in the past with, you've signed a buyer and you said you're going to pay me 3%, and all of a sudden it's, the broker compensation on the other side is 2%. You're not willing to, you've looked with this guy or girl forever. You're not willing to forgo that 1%. How do you enforce that? Is that mediation? Do you send your buyer agency agreement to the title company before the transaction closes and then say, well, this is part of the closing costs, or like,
That's
is that
between you and the buyer to
mediation?
That's between you and the buyer to enforce, and every broker has a different limitation as to when they would start to force that lawsuit against the.
So you would have to file in a potential small claims court or
You could do small claims, or you could do mediation or arbitration with your buyer. Something to, even sending a demand letter might be a good way to get started without actually having to file in small claims. But small claims is pretty straightforward if you did want to go that route.
Okay, because I don't know if anyone's dealt with that before. I have a feeling it's going to come up.
It's bad juju to do anything about it, unfortunately.
So one of the things that we have, and I've done a video on this, is to explain to the buyer as you're getting into that transaction, okay, the compensation on this particular property that the seller is willing to offer is 2% versus my 3%. And you give the buyer the prerogative to go ahead. Do you actually want to go through with this transaction with this particular house? And if so, how do you want to come up with that additional fund to pay that 1% difference? If you don't have the additional option or the desire to do that, to come up with that, then perhaps what you want to do is look at a different property. Give them the choice, and before you enter into the agreement, and before they actually go into a contract, but bringing their attention to that compensation up front versus having that conversation at the end.
After they fall in love with that house.
Well, but that is, I mean, it's not a perfect scenario, but it is a solution.
Dan,
Kyle, I think you do it before you show the house.
yeah,
Yeah, before you show it.
Exactly.
No, I get you would do it before you show them the house. And
That would be ideal.
But they still want to see it. That does not mean they're going to pay me or pay my broker the extra, whatever is the shortage. They want to see the house. And
that's when you would submit would ask them to submit in their offer a request that's all pay
In the contract?
prior to the contract with their offer. And then it would be included as part of the contract, but it would be the buyer's agreement with the seller, not you as a buyer's agent's agreement.
And we've been of the mindset that we weren't able to include anything in reference to compensation.
I'm going to talk to Dan about this.
Not just Dan. I mean, even with the Stacos.
What do you mean?
When we were Remax Select, we were told we could not include compensation in a sales agreement.
Yeah.
Since when?
And there's a lot of arguments back and forth on that. And you talk to one attorney, and one attorney will say one thing, and another attorney will say another on that topic. So, Andrew and I will get together and come up with a policy on that.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about that, Dan.
And you said what?
I'll talk to you.
and Kyle, my take on that is that Jim and Phyllis used to always say, this can't be coming from you as an agent.
Yeah.
But what Dan and the attorney were specifying is if you said, my buyer has advised me that we're requesting, X compensation, then it comes across differently because it's not you as the agent requesting this.
I guess I didn't hear that part of it, Tim. I was always just told that it could not be part of the contract, sales contract.
Yeah, back in the day, that's what they said. But now, yeah, I think Dan and the attorney have clarified that this would be hopefully coming from the buyer and it wouldn't be you requesting that change.
Okay. Yes. Is there anything else from online?
Yeah, James Bear again here on the tenant early lease termination. I get some serious things, but like, who determines, a life altering or a threat to life, health, or safety? I mean, is that some sort of committee or?
Yep, the statute itself outlines some examples of what that would be. And it's usually defined in the law.
Okay, but not in the paragraph here, not in the.
No, because
clause.
we can't just.
Can we get a link to that just so I know? Because I mean, I live in South Arlington, crime has risen up.
It's 55.1-1234.1.
Okay.
We can't just sit and copy and paste the entire VRLTA into the lease.
Okay, gotcha. I'll look at the VLRTA at that 55.1 through 12. Okay.
It's on the screen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Yes, hi. I've got one quick question here to go back to the compensation situation. From what this conversation has kind of suggested, that the buyer has to be the person that directs the buyer agent to ask for the seller to make up the difference in a compensation that's not the amount that's in the buyer agency brokerage. So my question becomes, I believe it was something understood that we couldn't, since it has to come from the buyer's direction, how does the buyer know that that's an option for them? Because it understood to me that we are not even supposed to suggest that. Again, going back to the actual buyer direction. So how do we give that suggestion to them that, oh, by the way, it can be solved potentially through this manner?
Just like you told me just now, you can explain that to your client. If they see a house that they're interested in, and before you go for a showing, you're like, listen, I looked at the house on the MLS and I noticed that this is their offer of compensation. It's different from what you and I agreed to. It's up to you, and you can explain to them what that's going to mean financially for them, and you can explain to them their options. You can be like, you can ask for a seller credit, you can ask for them to help you pay, or we can do this or something like that. And this is what you can do, is that you can also ask in your offer that they pay a certain portion of it, or that you can ask for a subsidy.
Okay, because
that's the time when you would tell them.
Okay, because my question really was specific in the vein of anything that I've read about this action that has brought this to the surface is that we weren't even able to say that because then it makes it's not the buyer's direction anymore. It's a suggestion that we're giving them. And that was certainly the conflict I had in my mind, is how do they know what they don't know? How do they know what they can ask for if we don't guide them with
Don't tell them.
But that's the thing. And I think that's how we got here, is a lot of people are afraid to talk about how they're getting paid with their clients. And
how our brokers are getting paid.
Yeah, or how the brokers are getting,
our brokers
yes,
are getting paid.
That too. And I think a lot of people are afraid of that and they don't want to get into it. It's not, kosher. I think that what you need to understand, and everyone needs to understand, that it's okay. And it's okay to clarify, this is how it breaks down, and this is what the differences are, and this is how we can ask for more. It's fine to do that. There's nothing stopping you.
Okay, because that's contrary to some things I've read. That's why I was asking that question. Some of the things that I've read about this, and again, these are generalized articles I'm reading, as relates to this action that was taken. But they were saying that, again, emphasizing so strongly, you can't suggest anything to this buyer. It all has to be their own thought, because otherwise it looks like you're influencing them. And that could have ramifications as to how their offer is received by the seller. And that
things that you can't suggest are that your services are free, or that seller will pay, unless they are offering that. You can suggest, or you can explain to them that seller may offer compensation, but you cannot say, like, yeah, don't worry, my services are free, you're not going to pay me anything, I know you're putting an amount in this buyer broker's agreement, or don't worry, no matter what amount you put in there, the seller's going to cover it. That's the things that you can't say, because it's not true.
Right. Agreed. But as I was saying, it's it was suggested in many articles that, again, I find that to be reasonable. What you're saying, I would like to be able to do that, but it was somehow casting doubt that took away the fact that it was at a buyer's direction. It was at the seller telling the buyer they should do this in order for them not to have this difference in what they agreed in the buyer agency and what is now reality that the listing side has offered as compensation. So I just want to stay on the right side of that concern.
If you wanted to drop those articles in the legal hotline, I'm happy to take a look.
Oh, cool. Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to turn off the Zoom. I don't know exactly how to do that, but I'm guessing I can figure it out. But thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Ariane.
Thanks.
Thank you.